serene village of Plainfougère in northwestern France, a bright young soul named Caroline Dickinson embarked on an end-of-term school trip with her friends. Just 13 years old, Caroline was a good student, a loving sister, and a beloved daughter. Little did she know that this journey would take her to the heart of a chilling nightmare. Welcome to Grim Riddles. Caroline's family fought tirelessly for justice after her murder, and their relentless pursuit led to a series of unexpected twists and turns, where even an immigration officer reading a newspaper headline played a crucial role in unraveling the mystery. Join us as we explore this emotional journey of love, loss, and unexpected twists. Please make sure you watch Caroline's father John Dickinson's tribute to his daughter at the end of the video. Young Caroline Dickinson, aged 13, was very excited. She was going on her first school trip abroad with her class teachers, beginning with a trip to France. She had been saving all of her money for the trip and couldn't wait for it to start. Caroline lived with her divorced mother Sue Dickinson, aged 38, who worked as a nurse, and her younger sister Jenny in Launceston in Cornwall, England. She was a good pupil and loved her school, Launceston College, a mixed comprehensive school in Cornwall. She was a member of the Brownies and took ballet lessons. She loved music, played the clarinet, and was a member of the school orchestra. Caroline's father, John Dickinson, aged 39, was employed as an environmental health officer for the North Cornwall District Council and lived in Bodmin in Cornwall. Although her parents had divorced, they remained an integral part of her life, each providing their own unique support and love. Caroline was cherished by both family and friends alike. She had never been away from her parents before, making this trip to France a significant milestone in her young life. Many children went to Brittany and France every year on school trips. It was regarded by schools as a safe place to take children to at the end of the school year. Caroline and her friends settled into a youth hostel in the village of Plainfougère. The group had spent the day at the iconic Montes landmark, the Abbey Church. That evening, they had sat outside looking at all the stars in the sky. The group sang songs and Caroline sang Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. After a lovely day, they all settled into bed for the night. Caroline chose to sleep on a mattress on the floor between two bunk beds so she could be near her friends. It was a decision that would forever change her fate. At about 4 a.m, an intruder sneaked through the hostel, likely through an unlocked door. Silently, he climbed the stairs to the first floor and entered the room where Caroline was sleeping. And Jasper woke up and vaguely heard Caroline mumbling, "Mum," and "help," or something like that. Caroline must be dreaming, she thought, and went back to sleep. Then she woke up to the sound of banging, but again thought nothing of it and went straight back to sleep. And Jasper woke up to the sound of Caroline coughing and wheezing in the middle of the night and a sleeping bag zip being undone. Caroline must be too hot or dreaming, she thought, and also went back to sleep. They all woke up at around 8 o'clock in the morning. Caroline was still sleeping, they thought, but to their horror, when they went to shake her awake, they realized she had been attacked and wasn't breathing. She had been murdered in the night.
A British schoolgirl has been raped and suffocated on a school holiday to France. 4 friends of Caroline Dickinson, who was 13, woke up to find her murdered in her bed in the dormitory they were sharing. The attack happened at a hostel in a small Brittany village where the group from a Cornwall school were staying.
Police were called and the teachers tried to keep the other girls calm, and they were told that Caroline was ill. All the parents were notified. Back in Launceston, England, everyone was in shock. The town was in a state of grief, having lost one of their own.
As the news spread, the small Cornish community of Launceston was stunned.
It was a town in absolute and utter shock. I remember talking to Caroline's grandfather very briefly, but walking around the town and trying to talk to other children and parents and so on, everyone really was just too stunned to talk.
The college is devastated by the news of Caroline's death. Caroline was a lovely girl. She worked hard, she had lots of friends, she always had a ready smile. She was quiet, she was gentle. She was a credit to our college.
For Caroline Dickinson's parents, John and Sue, the nightmare was worst of all.
While the town and her parents were dealing with their grief, they were hoping her killer would soon be caught. A French magistrate was put in charge of the investigation, and initially it seemed to be going well. On the 20th of July 1996, just a few days later, a suspect was arrested. The investigating judge was convinced they had their man, Patrice Badet. He was an alcoholic vagrant who had been known for other lewd assaults. He confessed, but unfortunately DNA excluded him and he was released. So they were back to where they'd started. Back in England, the funeral for Caroline was held. Ever since the murder, Caroline's father had made numerous appeals for help.
I have come here to appeal to the people of Brittany for their help in finding the perpetrator of this monstrous crime. And I would plead for anybody who might have information to please come forward urgently to the judge or the police.
Back in France, the investigation for Caroline's killer seemed to stall. It was a year on and there were no new leads. John Dickinson had become very frustrated. Besides going through the terrible grief of losing his daughter in such a cruel way, he now had to fight to see that the investigation was being done. He was in a foreign country where he didn't speak the language, but together with his French lawyer he kept the investigation going. He thought the investigation was being mishandled and that it was deeply flawed.
As time's gone on, his arrogance almost has got to me, and it is really rather annoying.
In what way?
In that he seems to feel that he doesn't have to inform anybody about what he's doing, that he is a law unto himself.
Crucial witness statements were ignored, and fingerprints at the murder scene were never taken. In the first few days of the investigation, no door-to-door interviews were conducted, and the investigator just ignored John and wouldn't give him any details of how the investigation was going. And critically, the request to have the DNA of the men in the town tested was denied. But John was determined to get something done. He called for more action by French authorities in attempting to solve the crime, but he was getting nowhere. Finally, with no other option, John Dickinson took his fight to the Foreign Office to put pressure on France to investigate properly.
I'm hoping that the French will realise that we do not intend to sit back and keep quiet about this.
On the 2nd of February 1999, the UK government urged the French to investigate the deaths of British nationals more thoroughly, and under intense pressure from the media, the magistrate in charge of Caroline's case was fired.
We are very pleased indeed with the news that the Court of Appeal have decided to take over the case.
The French magistrate, Renaud van Reinberg, was appointed as the new judge for the investigation into the death. He was described as an intelligent, active and efficient judge. He promised a fresh start to the case. Fresh door-to-door interviews were done and witnesses were re-interviewed. There were also mass DNA tests allowed. Unfortunately, no DNA matches were found. Then, Renaud made a discovery that changed the course of the investigation. He found a connection to another incident in a neighbouring town. On the same night that Caroline was killed, someone entered another hostel where girls were staying, but the girls woke up and put on the light. The girls shouted, "What are you doing here?" He fled and seemed to go straight to the hospital at Plainvogère, where the attack on Caroline took place. This link had been ignored in the first investigation. He realized that this seemed to be a sexual predator targeting youth hostels. Renaud then sent requests from the whole of France to ask if there had been similar incidences in other youth hostels. He wanted to generate a list of suspects whose DNA could be tested. In total, there were over 3,000 DNA tests related to the investigation that took more than 2 years to complete. One name kept coming up during investigations: Spanish national Francisco Arces Montes, aged 47. He had been arrested before, in 1994, for an attempted assault in a youth hostel. He had been issued about 10 youth hostel cards, and he fit the identikit and was their new main suspect. But no one could find him as he was a transient. He had no fixed address and travelled between countries. His details were circulated across Europe to all police stations, but nothing came of it. Everyone was beginning to lose hope that Caroline's killer would ever be caught. Renaud van Reinberg had decided to make his suspect's name public, and a story about the case ran in the British Sunday Times newspaper. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, in the USA, an immigration officer named Tommy Ontko was going about his daily routine in Detroit. Little did he know that a newspaper headline would thrust him into the heart of the investigation. Mr. Ontko had just finished an immigration interview and was on a break. He grabbed the Sunday Times newspaper to read while he relaxed and had something to eat. There he saw the newspaper article on Caroline's murder, and it named the suspect. He later said, "I thought this case had been going on for some time, and they don't have the guy yet." Curious, Ontko thought he would check to see if the suspect ever entered the US.
But when it came up on our system, initially, it wasn't quite as the London Times was. It was R.C. Montes as the surname and Francisco as the first name. And within just a very few minutes of running those checks, we determined that somebody with that name and a date of birth that would be consistent with the news article, published date of birth or year of his age, had actually made an entry to the United States. Some more computer checks started coming back, and it indicated that a person with the name and date of birth, who I originally ran a very close date of birth, just flipped date of birth, had been arrested down in Florida.
And the pieces of the puzzle finally began to fall into place. Montes had been arrested for a lewd and lascivious assault eerily similar to the crime against Caroline. DNA evidence linked him to the assault and subsequently to the Caroline Dickinson murder. Justice, which had seemed elusive for so long, finally had a name and a face. Montes had been arrested in Miami Beach by Sergeant Angel Vasquez for an assault on an Irish backpacker who was staying at a youth hostel with 3 friends. She had found a towel by her private parts and felt sore.
The very first call was the Irish girls calling 911 wanting to report a burglary and a assault. I was notified by our communications section to go to the Banana Bungalow. I spoke to all the Irish students, and they seemed extremely credible and legitimately concerned that something had occurred to them, and there was physical evidence as to the fact.
Because we called this morning because there was some man in our room.
They had gone to bed fairly late, and one of the victims, one of the girls, woke up and found a towel placed over her pelvic region. She did not go to bed with a towel over her. She went to bed in just wearing panties and a t-shirt. She also noticed that her panties had been moved, and what she told me, she felt uncomfortable in her private area. She confirmed that, something had been touched. She also felt that she had been penetrated.
He was caught when he was seen by 2 Chilean girls whose room he had entered 2 nights before, but they had chased him out. They called the police. His DNA was tested against the profile from the attack on the Irish girl. The police report was sent to Tommy Ontko in Detroit.
When I read the police report, that's when I kind of got the chills, because it said that this individual was at a youth hostel, the same kind of a place that was in France, that he committed a sex crime. So it was very much like the MO of the criminal being sought in France. I wanted to get on the first flight to Miami and just go down to the jail myself that night to make sure that he was in jail like they said he probably was, because I did not want him getting away. I did not want him getting released.
Tommy then had to try and find the French investigator dealing with the case. It was difficult because of the language barrier, but he managed to get hold of a retired honorary British consul in Brittany who sometimes acted as an interpreter for the local police. He explained everything, and that he needed to confirm Montes's name and date of birth, as he did not want to accuse an innocent person, so they had to confirm that before he could go any further. There was a race against time, as Montes could be bailed at any time. They happened to get hold of the officers who at that very moment were about to board a ferry to England to attend the Caroline Dickinson inquest.
I phoned. John Luke answered. I said, have you got Caroline file with you? He said, yes, very important. Something interesting? I said, more than interesting. I said, the guy you're looking for is reported in the British press. He's been located. I told them an immigration officer in the United States has found him. What he wants to know is his date of birth. And they said, we'll find it for you, we'll find it for you.
When Ron saw the results, compared to what I gave him, he didn't want to be the one to say, okay, this is definitely the person. So he said, Tommy, I want you to call the car direct just to make sure that there's no error and get the right information that you need from them. Called them up. They pulled over to the side of the road again, looked through the file to make sure there was no error. They gave me that. They told me the name, date of birth, where he was from in Spain. I was still very cautious at the time. I didn't really believe that it was that easy, if you will, and I really didn't want to say that we had our guy.
His DNA profile was sent to Renault, and it matched the DNA traces found on Caroline. In April of 2001, An inquest at Bodmin Magistrates Court into Caroline's death recorded a verdict of unlawful killing, and French police issued a warrant for Montes's arrest after DNA tests showed a match. In June, a US judge ruled that Montes should be extradited to France. So in November, he was handed over to American federal marshals in Miami, and on the 20th of November 2001, the former lorry driver was extradited to France for questioning by investigators. Finally, a result for John Dickinson, a determined father who had never stopped his fight to get justice for his beloved daughter. He had kept pushing the investigation. He kept giving interviews, speaking to the press, and pushing officials. But it would take another few years before he would see that justice finally come to pass. It took 6 months for the extradition and another 2 years to start the trial. In court, Montes appeared distant, despondent, and disconnected from reality. His responses, delivered in a lifeless, monotone manner, were brief and devoid of emotion. He did show occasional moments of remorse, and at one point he broke down in tears as his troubled childhood was recounted. Montes's troubles began to manifest when he was just 20 years old. After a disturbing incident where he exposed himself to a neighbor, he was sent to a psychiatrist who diagnosed him with depression and progressive schizophrenia. The assault on Caroline Dickinson in Brittany in July 1996 followed a disturbing pattern that Montes had established over time. He would meticulously scout youth hostels and similar establishments before surreptitiously entering them under the cover of night. Shockingly, evidence presented in the French court, which would not have been admissible in a British court, revealed that he had been imprisoned for 5 years in Germany during the mid-1980s for armed violations. In the mid-1970s, Montes left Spain, adopting a nomadic lifestyle across Europe. He occasionally worked as a waiter or driver, but primarily relied on financial support from his father. The only individual who testified at his trial, fellow Asturian Eduardo Riesco Suarez, painted a grim picture of Montes. Suarez revealed that Montes was well acquainted with youth hostels across Europe and spent his time pursuing underage girls. Disturbingly, Montes considered girls of ages 11 or 12 as ideal, deeming anyone older as too old for his preferences. Suarez also disclosed that Montes had a volatile temper, once even admitting that he had no qualms about taking a life. Ironically, Montes's first known violation and aggression led to a brief relationship and the birth of a son. In 1981, he had forcibly entered the room of a French girl at a hostel in the Netherlands, where he touched her without her consent. Strangely, they later encountered each other in Paris and entered into a consensual relationship, resulting in a pregnancy. However, she soon left Montes, citing physical violence as the reason. Montes's pattern of violations continued in subsequent years. He was arrested in 1994 after breaking into a hostel in central France, where a group of Irish girls were staying. In 1996, he was apprehended at a hostel in Lens in northern Spain. In August 1997, he faced charges for an armed attack, once again in Lens. Returning to court after a brief recess, Montes made an unusual statement, expressing remorse and requesting forgiveness from Caroline's parents for his tears. He said that his emotional display was out of place in a room where he believed he was not the victim. Montes admitted to the assault but denied murder, claiming her death had been an accident. He claimed he was mentally ill and was not responsible for his actions. On the 14th of June 2004, after a 2-week trial, Montes was unanimously found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison with a faint possibility of parole after 2 decades.
The events of the last week have been, for us, necessary but extremely draining. And of course, as has the pursuit of justice for Caroline over the last 8 years.
But it wasn't over for the Dickinson family yet. Montes appealed his verdict and sentence, and a retrial took another year. Caroline's father told the appeals court he would be forever haunted by the vision of seeing her body in a morgue. Life had stuck at the same page for 9 years, and I have not been able to start afresh, he said. His testimony was followed by that of Caroline's younger sister, 20-year-old Jenny, who has never before spoken about what she went through after hearing that her best friend had died on a school trip to Brittany. Jenny, who was 11 at the time of the attack, said that for around 6 years she'd been unable to talk to even her close friends about what had happened. Standing just to the right of Montes and directly before the judge and jury, the media studies student from Launceston in Cornwall told of her loneliness following the loss of her very good friend. It took a while for me to believe it, and I was very lonely, she said. She added that things had not started to sink in until Caroline's funeral, after which she shut down for a while. Asked how she felt today, she said, "I don't think I can explain that." After a week of evidence, the jury took an hour to reach its appeal verdict. They upheld the 30-year sentence imposed on Francisco Montes for the murder of Caroline Dickinson. Caroline's father, John, spoke outside the court of the pain of reliving the events for his family and the friends of Caroline's who gave further evidence at the retrial of Montes. He said, "We hope our search for justice for Caroline is at last complete and that she can be allowed to rest in peace. We did not want to be here, but Montes's exploitation of the French judicial system and our determination to seek justice for Caroline has required us again to suffer the pain of listening and thus reliving the events of the 18th of July 1996. He called Montes an evil man who had no grounds for appeal. It seems that the offender's rights have overshadowed those of the victims, he said. Montes promptly appealed again, but withdrew after it was revealed how dangerous he was. It took about 10 minutes to read out the list of his previous convictions. He had been carrying out these assaults for the last 20 years all across Europe. There were 4 charges of assault in Germany, 14 suspected assaults in Spain, and an attempted assault in France, all before the murder of Caroline. The aftermath of the trial showed how the lack of cooperation between the police in different countries hampered Montes being arrested much earlier. John Dickinson has campaigned for an international DNA database between countries.
I think it's definitely got to be the way forward, not just in France but the whole of Europe. Any police officer in this country will explain the merits of it and how it's been beneficial in solving so many crimes, and it's only been up and running a few years. It's got to be the way forward.
It's not only whose time has come, it's overdue. And I think internationally the police community needs to ensure that the governments in all of their countries use this DNA system to track down and identify criminals.
The case of Caroline Dickinson will be remembered for more than just its twists and turns. It will be remembered for the relentless campaign of her father, John Dickinson, to find justice for his daughter.
First thing I'd like to say that this is about Caroline, or Kaz as some of her friends knew her. Although her life was short, she was happy. We knew she had a life ahead of her full of promise. We have some wonderful memories that we will cherish, and she will never be forgotten.
The last thing heard of Montes was in 2015, when he was found guilty of indecently assaulting a young woman a year after he killed Caroline. He was extradited and tried in Spain, where he was sentenced to 11 years in prison. He is expected to serve his jail time in Spain once he has been released from prison in France, where he is scheduled to stay until January 2027.